with your extensive experience in executive remuneration, how is executive remuneration configured in the big banks?
Well, for most of the big banks, it's 1/3 fixed annual remuneration.
Mm-hmm.
And fixed annual remuneration means their base salary, their super, their benefits, and that's set each year. And it's usually set on a job evaluated basis with reference to the market.
Mm-hmm.
The second part is called short-term incentives.
Mm-hmm.
And this is incentives that are assessed on an annual basis. Usually they're driven by a combination of financial and non-financial measures. For most of the big banks, the weighting is around about 60 or 70% financial measures. Short-term incentives are delivered either in cash or a mix of equity and cash. Long-term incentives, which make up the final third, are generally driven by financial metrics, and a metric called TSR, total shareholder return, is the dominant metric. LTIs are exclusively delivered by means of equity in the employing organisation, and that equity will vest over a 3 to 4 year period. There's another element to this too, and that most of the big banks have what they call minimum shareholding requirements. In other words, the executive must hold a certain amount of equity in the employing organisations. And that can vary between 100% of their fixed annual remuneration and 500%. In the case of Brian Hartzer, the CEO of Westpac, he's required to hold 500% of equity in the employing organisation. And the equity is usually acquired through the STI and the LTI plan.
So, as a package, what's all that expected to achieve, Geoff?
It's intended to encourage the executive primarily to focus on shareholder returns. Now, the big banks have delivered 8 to 10% shareholder return consistently for the last 5 years. But in doing so, the questions that the Royal Commission has raised about profit and shareholder returns ahead of their obligations to other stakeholders.
Yes.
It's a real key issue.
Yes, okay. So where did that model come from?
It's a model that we imported largely from the US, probably in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Before that, in Australia we had a different model. We had a model that was focused primarily on fixed annual remuneration, and there were modest bonus plans, often discretionary. Executives were encouraged to take equity in their employing organisation, but they acquired the equity mostly through share plans, staff share plans, executive share plans, where they could buy the shares at a discount to market.
Yes. Yep. Okay. So what are the key performance drivers that encourage those packages to be activated?
Well, if you look at the short-term incentives, there's often KPIs like gross annual revenue, overhead costs. Another one's called NPAT, net profit after tax, EBIT, earnings before interest and tax. And you'll find that the weighting on these financial drivers in the short-term incentive plan is around about 60 to 70%. I think I mentioned that before. Now, in the STIs, they also have other KPIs.
So together, how does all that relate to the findings of the Royal Commission in relation to the executive remuneration in banks?
Well, what we've seen coming out of the Royal Commission over the last 12 months is just these multiple failures of corporate social responsibility, where the banks and the larger insurance companies essentially have been promoting products that customers don't need, don't want, or can't afford.
Increasing the risks, of course, for those customers.
Yes. And you find that the banks, they've also been charging fees for services not delivered.
Yes.
Just in the paper this morning, there was the AMP had taken issue at the allegations that they'd been charging dead people for services. A whole raft of other things. Essentially what's happened is that, in my view, is that the banks have been, it's a very competitive market out there. And, you know, these organisations need to be financially viable. I'm not making any suggestions that they shouldn't focus on returns. It's just that the returns need to be balanced with the needs of their other stakeholder groups, such as their customers first and foremost, their employees. These banks are part of the community. They provide the liquidity that underpins the whole economy. They provide the transactional services that we all use every day. So we need them to be present in our communities. Inside of these banks, there's a fairly pervasive culture, fairly financially driven, not particularly people-focused cultures exist within these banks. And it's deeply embedded, and it's embedded from the board down in the collective psyche of the organisation.
So do you have any advice for board remuneration committees on how they might reconfigure
Yes.
the remuneration for executives that we're discussing here in the big four banks?
Yes. If I was on the remuneration committee, or if I was advising a remuneration committee, I'd be saying, have a very close look at the model that you've got in place and asking the question, is this in the best interests of all stakeholders?
All stakeholders.
All
yes.
stakeholders.
Yes, that's
or have we got the balance right? And I think if they're honest with themselves, they'll say, no, we haven't got it right. I would like to see them go back to a model that's based primarily on fixed. I'd like to see them target a position that's at the market median or below, because as soon as you target above the market median, it has a ratchet effect. If you target below the market median, it has a retarding effect. It will bring the market back over time. So I'd be looking at moving back to a model based primarily on fixed. If they want to have a modest bonus scheme, I'd be capping that at 20% of the fixed. I'd be saying, let's have 4 or 5 performance drivers of that, of which financial is one. 20%, no more than 20% weighting. Customer, people, environment, and safety. We're all implicated in part in the problems that have emerged because we as individuals and through our super funds we chase returns. So we're all partly to blame.
But it has. I think what I've taken from your points in your report is that it's gone too far.
It's gone too far.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Geoff.
Yeah.
Great to be able to talk about these things.
Yes.
And I hope other people are interested in those topics as we are. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.